For 1,000 years the faithful prayed, and sometimes they were answered. Famines broke, plagues vanished, doomed ships returned. The holy texts called it divine grace. But when a young theologian mapped every miracle onto coalition shipping records, the truth was undeniable. At every intervention, across every century, a single presence lingered, a human vessel. Humanity had been quietly saving them, feeding them, healing them, and never once asked to be known. The theologian whispered the only question that mattered. Why? One scholar's pattern shattered a 1,000-year-old faith. The coalition discovered they weren't protected by gods, but quietly managed by humans. That revelation left them with an unbearable question. If humanity had hidden for so long, what did they really want? And what would happen if they finally asked? The discovery began in the dust-choked vaults of the Great Library on Tellara, when a junior archivist named Sira noticed a single impossible ship. She had been assigned the most tedious task in the faith, digitizing 1,000-year-old shipping records for the Coalition Ministry of Commerce. A forgotten job, buried beneath the temple. But Sira was a theologian by training, exiled to the archives after questioning doctrine. She knew every miracle by heart. The famine of year 832, broken when grain shipments mysteriously appeared in the planetary capital. The plague of year 1142, vanishing overnight after an unmarked medical station entered orbit. The lost Ninth Expeditionary Fleet, guided home through an ion storm by a ghost signal that no known technology could explain. Each recorded miracle came with sensor logs, and buried in those logs again and again was a single ship identifier, HMRS Wanderer. Same vessel appearing across centuries. No life signs detectable, no communications, just a silent, watchful presence that vanished the moment the crisis passed. Sira's initial report was dismissed as blasphemy. The high order of the illuminated path had built a millennium of authority on the divine origin of these interventions. To suggest a mortal hand, worse, an alien hand, would unravel their entire theology. Her supervisors buried the data, revoked her clearance, and threatened excommunication. But Sira had already sent a copy to an old mentor, a retired admiral who understood coalition traffic patterns better than any priest. He confirmed the impossible. The HMRS Wanderer was not a ghost. It was a human deep-cover reconnaissance vessel, its hull signature matching a ship first documented by the Jaith Combine during initial contact with humanity 40 years earlier. Humans had been in coalition space for 1,000 years, long before they officially reached the stars. They had watched famines, cured plagues, and saved fleets, and they had never said a word. The church moved to silence Sira permanently, but before they could, she received a transmission from an unknown source. The message was short, and it was written in flawless coalition high script. It said, "We need to talk." And the sender ID was HMRS Wanderer. The transmission could not be traced. The source appeared to originate from everywhere and nowhere at once. A whisper threaded through the same deep space relay network the coalition had used for centuries. Sira had no way to verify if it was real, or if the church had found a crueler way to destroy her. But fear was a luxury she had already sacrificed. She responded with 3 words: "Where do we meet?" The reply came in the form of a coordinate set, pulsing gently at the edge of coalition-charted space, in a dead system that no species had ever bothered to claim. She borrowed a smuggler's freighter, filed false flight plans, and burned hard for the void. The Wanderer was waiting for her. Not a warship, not a reconnaissance vessel as the records had suggested, but something far stranger. It was small by interstellar standards, barely larger than a diplomatic courier, its hull smooth and featureless, absorbing every scan she threw at it. No weapons visible, no markings except the designation. As she approached, a docking bay opened without a single word of greeting. Inside, gravity felt native, air composition matched her homeworld perfectly, and a single corridor lit with soft amber light led her to a circular chamber. There, a human sat at a simple table, a carafe of water between them. The human was female, gray-haired, with eyes that seemed to hold too many years. She introduced herself as Captain Myra Ellen Vance, and her first words were not an explanation but an apology. She told Sierra that the interventions had not been authorized by any human government. They were not the work of explorers, diplomats, or soldiers. For 1,000 years, a single lineage had maintained a vigil over the coalition, a family of watchers, sworn to an ancient directive known only as the Shepherd's Oath. Humanity had discovered faster-than-light travel far earlier than anyone knew, a full millennium before they made themselves known to the Jaith Combine. When their first deep space probes discovered the coalition worlds, they found not a threat, but a cradle of fragile, beautiful civilizations that had never known scarcity or war or true despair. The shepherds, a handful of volunteers, decided that these worlds should never have to. They would protect them from the shadows, answering the prayers no one knew were being heard. The revelation shattered Sierra's understanding in a way the raw data never could. It wasn't theft of faith, it was sacrifice. The shepherds had abandoned Earth, lived out their lives in cold silence, intervening only when a civilization faced extinction. Famines, plagues, naval catastrophes, each intervention risked exposure, and each exposure risked the one thing they guarded most: the coalition's right to evolve without knowing it had ever been managed. But the Church's discovery changed everything. The veil was thin now, and Captain Vance had broken her own oath to make contact because the coalition was about to face a danger that even the shepherds could not stop alone. A danger that had been hunting the galaxy for eons and had just found their scent. That night, while Sierra and Vance spoke in secret, the High Order moved. They did not try to discredit Sierra, they tried to make her irrelevant. Through proxies in the Council, they pushed an emergency resolution declaring all historical shipping logs classified as sacred artifacts, removed from public databases by religious privilege. Within hours, archivists across 12 systems received orders to purge records of any unidentified vessel signatures. The Church was erasing the evidence, but they were too slow. Sierra's initial report had reached more than her old mentor. It had reached journalists, skeptics, and a new generation of priests who had grown tired of answers that demanded silence. A single news outlet on the border world of Murren published the full findings with a headline that would ignite the coalition. "Our miracles were human. They have been watching us for 1,000 years." The story broke containment within a single cycle. On the capital world of the coalition, millions gathered in the great plazas, torn between awe and fury. Some wept, believing their faith had been stolen. Others, to the Church's horror, wept with gratitude, seeing the interventions as proof that there was goodness in the galaxy worth believing in. Riots erupted on 5 worlds as sects splintered. Politicians who had built careers on divine rhetoric scrambled to adapt. And through all of it, the Wanderer stayed silent in its dead system, waiting. But the most terrifying revelation was still to come. When Captain Vance opened her ship's deepest archives to Sierra, she revealed not just the history of the shepherds, but the reason they had remained hidden for so long. Humanity had not been protecting the coalition from itself. They had been protecting it from something else. Something that was drawn by prayer. Something that was drawn by prayer. The shepherds called it the dirge. Captain Vance pulled up the archives and showed Sierra sensor readings that predated the coalition's oldest civilizations, a form of radiation that did not register on any known spectrum, but moved with purpose. It was attracted to concentrated psychic output: worship, hope, desperation. Anything that reached outward with enough uniformity became a beacon. And the coalition, with its 1,000-year tradition of directed prayer toward a single divine source, had been broadcasting its location into the void like a lighthouse. The shepherds' interventions did more than save lives. They diluted the signal. By answering prayers discreetly, they prevented the kind of mass, synchronized spiritual outburst that would draw the dirge's full attention. Every miracle they performed was an act of protection as much as compassion. But when Sira's findings went public, the signal changed. Across 15 systems, billions of believers simultaneously questioned their faith, their gratitude, their fear, and the psychic cascade was louder than anything in recorded history. Vance showed Sira the data in real time, a waveform spiking off the charts, a scream of confusion and awe that rolled through subspace and kept going. The dirge had heard it, and it was already moving. Sira demanded to know what the dirge actually was. Vance hesitated, then showed her the remains of a dead world. 50,000 years ago, a civilization in the galactic core had reached a similar crisis of faith, and the dirge had answered, not with fire or plague, but with silence. It spoke to them directly, a voice in the shared unconscious, offering certainty, peace, and an end to all doubt. Every sentient being on that planet lay down within the same hour and never rose again. Their bodies were perfectly preserved, faces frozen in bliss. The dirge consumed not flesh, but the will to exist. It was a predator of meaning itself. The coalition had no defense against such a thing. The High Order, in its panic, did not turn to the humans for help. Instead, they did exactly what Sira feared. They declared the dirge a holy reckoning. In a closed-door session broadcast to only the most devout, the High Luminary announced that the human revelation was a test of faith, and the coming silence was the divine embrace promised for millennia. To resist would be heresy. To listen to the shepherds would be to reject salvation. In 48 hours, the coalition had split into 3 factions: those who believed Sira, those who believed the luminary, and billions more too terrified to speak. But then came the worst revelation. Vance showed Sira one final archive entry, dated precisely 12 hours ago. The dirge was not coming. It was already here. It had been here for decades, dormant, feeding incrementally on the coalition's steady background prayer. The humans hadn't been fighting a distant threat. They'd been managing a chronic infection, keeping the patient alive just below the fever threshold. And now the fever had broken. On the border world of Murin, the same planet that broke Sira's story, the population fell silent mid-sentence. The entire planet went dark. No explosions, no distress calls. Just a quiet that swallowed every transmission, and then a single signal repeating, "We are at peace, join us." The council convened an emergency session. For the first time in 1,000 years, a human sat at the table. Captain Vance faced the delegates, her face weathered and calm, and told them the truth that the shepherds had never dared speak. Humanity had not revealed itself earlier because they didn't believe the coalition could handle the dirge's truth without succumbing. They thought they were too fragile. But Sira proved them wrong. She found the pattern, she asked the question, and that meant the coalition might just have the one thing the previous victims lacked: a desperate, furious will to fight for their right to doubt. As the council chamber fell silent, a new sensor alarm screamed through the station. The dirge had just changed course. It wasn't heading for the capital world. It was heading straight for the Wanderer. And the one thing the dirge had never encountered before, in its billion years of silence, was a species that answered prayers because they could. The Wanderer did not run. As the dirge closed in, Captain Vance opened every comm channel she had, broadcasting not a distress call but a question. The same question Sira had asked the moment she found the pattern. Why? Why had humanity hidden? Why had they saved them? Why had they never asked for thanks? The question rolled across the coalition like a shockwave, and in that moment, billions of minds realized they did not know the answer. Certainty collapsed into doubt. Fear into curiosity, worship into wonder, and the dirge, which had fed on certainty for 1 billion years, suddenly found nothing to consume. It arrived at the Wanderer as a pressure, a silence so deep it seemed to press against the hull like the weight of an ocean. Inside the ship, Sierra felt it trying to speak to her, not in words but in an overwhelming sense of peace, an invitation to let go of all questions, all fear, all effort. It promised an end to the ache of existence, and for a heartbeat she wanted to accept. But then she heard Captain Vance, speaking through gritted teeth, reciting the names of every shepherd who had lived and died in silence so that others might have the chance to doubt. The list went on for minutes. In the crew compartments, in the corridors, even in the engine room, human voices joined in. They spoke the names like a prayer, but not a prayer for help. A prayer of gratitude for the courage to hide, to sacrifice, to wait for this exact moment. The dirge recoiled. It could not process gratitude that expected nothing in return. For 1 billion years, it had silenced civilizations by answering their longing for certainty, for an end to doubt. But these humans did not want certainty. They wanted the messy, painful, glorious uncertainty of existence. And now, so did the coalition. Across hundreds of worlds, billions of beings who had spent their lives praying for miracles realized that the miracles had been mortal. They had been given freely without expectation, and that simple truth shattered the signal the dirge could feed on. In the vacuum where faith had been, something new took root. Not religion, but relationship. Not worship, but gratitude. And that gratitude was a frequency the dirge could not touch. Captain Vance made a decision that broke the shepherd's oath for the final time. She opened the Wanderer's entire archive to the coalition, every record of every intervention, every log entry from 1,000 years of silent protection. But she also opened the oldest file, the one marked with a single word: origin. It told the truth about humanity. Earth had not been spared the dirge. 10,000 years ago, a nascent human civilization had been swallowed by the same silence. Their will consumed, their bodies lying in peaceful repose that lasted for centuries. But a small group had survived, those who had been too stubborn, too questioning, too doubtful to accept the bliss. They rebuilt, they remembered, and they swore that no other world would suffer the same fate. The shepherd's oath was not born of compassion alone. It was penance. It was proof that humanity refused to let silence win. The dirge, now starved of the unity it craved, began to fracture. Sierra could feel it, the pressure lifting, the false peace dissolving into 1 million fragments of lost voices, the echoes of every civilization it had ever consumed. And in that moment, the Wanderer broadcast one final message, not from Captain Vance, but from Sierra herself. She spoke to the coalition in the first person, not as an archivist or a theologian, but as a being who had doubted, who had been afraid, and who had chosen to ask questions anyway. She told them that the humans had never wanted to be gods. They had only wanted to be neighbors. And now, the door was open for a new kind of coexistence, one built not on hidden mercy, but on open friendship. The dirge dissipated, unable to sustain itself against a galaxy that had learned to question. On Murren, the billions who had fallen silent began to wake, their eyes blinking in confusion, their memories filled with a dream they could not quite recall. The High Order's luminary resigned within the hour, and his final statement was not a defense of dogma, but a quiet admission. The divine was never the miracle. The miracle was always the kindness. As the Wanderer drifted away from the dead system, Sierra looked at Captain Vance one last time and asked the question that had driven her all along. Why did they never say a word? Vance smiled, her old eyes reflecting the starlight, and said, "Because the best answers are the ones you find yourself." The truth that Sierra unearthed was never about technology or power. It was about a choice repeated silently across 1,000 years. The choice to act without recognition, to love without reward. The shepherds understood something that most civilizations take ages to learn, that the deepest gift you can give someone is the freedom to make sense of their own existence. By hiding, they didn't steal the coalition's faith. They protected its ability to ask why. And when the answers finally came, they didn't offer a new god. They offered a mirror, reflecting back the quiet strength of a people who had prayed without knowing the listener. The dirge fed on certainty, but it starved on gratitude. That was the human secret, and now it belongs to the coalition. A galaxy that once saw miracles as divine interventions now sees them as evidence that even in the cold between stars, compassion can endure without a spotlight. The Wanderer still sails, its mission changed but its heart unchanged. And somewhere out there, a young theologian on another world might just be cross-referencing her own holy texts against unfamiliar censor logs, wondering if her people are not alone either. If this story stayed with you, hit subscribe and ring the bell for more hidden histories. The universe is full of quiet guardians. You just have to know how to look.